Maria Fedorovna Kozlova felt a shiver run through her emaciated body as the iron wheels of the train screeched against the rails, slowing down. Through a narrow crack in the freight car, she saw the dark silhouettes of Carpathian firs flashing by. This was her only chance, now or never. The February wind of 1947 pierced to the bone. In the car, crammed with female prisoners, there hung a suffocating stench of unwashed bodies and human despair. 72 women, herded from various camps, were heading toward an unknown fate deep into Soviet territory. "Maris, have you completely lost your mind?" whispered Katerina Petrovna, her only ally among the prisoners. "There's a chasm down there, at least 20 meters high." Maria clenched her fist around the small cross hidden in the lining of her tattered quilted jacket. She knew Katerina was right. She knew the chances of survival were almost nil. But the alternative was even worse. Ahead lay the uranium mines of Kolyma, from which no one returned. The train screeched its brakes again. The composition was traveling along a narrow mountain road, curving around sharp turns. Maria could see a mountain river glistening in the moonlight below. The distance to the water was enormous, but it was her only hope for salvation. Her fingers groped for the loosely held plank in the car's wall. A few days ago, she had noticed that the nails were loose. Every night, when the guards fell asleep, she carefully loosened the wooden plank using a shard of metal found on the floor. "If I don't jump now, in 3 days I'll be gone," Maria whispered, looking into Katerina's eyes. "I know what's waiting for us. I overheard the guards talking." Katerina nodded, understanding. Both women were experienced enough prisoners to read between the lines. This transport was no ordinary transfer. It was a dispatch to certain death. The plank gave way. The opening was wide enough to squeeze through, but small enough not to attract the attention of the other prisoners. Maria knew there were informers among them, ready to betray her for an extra piece of bread. Icy air rushed into the crack, bringing with it the smell of snow and freedom. Somewhere far below, a mountain river roared. Maria closed her eyes and tried to recall the prayer her grandmother used to whisper. The words wouldn't come. In 5 years in the camps, she had forgotten much of her former life. "Lord, if you exist," she whispered, "give me strength." The train slowed again on a particularly sharp curve. This was her chance. Maria glanced back at Katerina one last time. She silently handed her a piece of bread, her last ration. "Survive," Katerina whispered. "Survive for all of us." Maria tucked the bread into her bosom and, without further hesitation, squeezed through the crack. The sharp edges of the planks scratched her until she bled, but she no longer felt the pain. Adrenaline drowned out all sensations. For a second, she hung on the edge of the car, clinging to a metal handle. Below, in the moonlight, sharp rocks and the dark water of the mountain river were visible. The distance seemed infinite, but the sound of approaching footsteps from the guard forced her to let go. Maria Fedorovna Kozlova fell into the darkness of the Carpathian night, not knowing if she would meet the dawn alive. 6 months earlier, the morning of August 21st, 1946, began with the thud of boots on the wooden floor. Maria woke to the shouts and the jingle of keys. Dawn streamed through the window of her small apartment in Uzhhorod, painting the walls crimson. "Kozlova Maria Fedorovna," barked the NKVD sergeant, bursting into the room. "Get dressed quickly." She knew this day would come. Yesterday, they arrested her neighbor. The day before, the schoolteacher. A wave of repressions was sweeping over Transcarpathia, recently annexed to the Soviet Union. Local residents, especially those who had worked under the previous regime, were systematically identified and sent to camps. Maria had worked as a translator in the Hungarian administration until 1944. That was her crime in the eyes of the new authorities, collaboration with the bourgeois regime. The fact that she was just earning her bread didn't interest anyone. "You have 5 minutes?" added the sergeant, looking at her with poorly concealed contempt. "Take only the essentials." Maria took a small bundle with underwear and a photo of her parents. At the last moment, she tucked a small silver cross into her bosom, the only thing left from her mother. She knew that if they found it, things would be worse, but she couldn't part with it. The prison in Uzhhorod was overcrowded. In a cell 4 by 6 meters, 23 women were held. They slept on the floor in shifts, fed once a day with thin soup and a piece of black bread. Here, Maria first met Katerina Petrovna Volkova, a former mathematics teacher from Lviv. Katerina had fallen under repressions as a Polish intelligence agent. Her crime was having received an education in Krakow. "The main thing is not to break in the first days," Katerina whispered to the newcomers. "They try to break your spirit right away. If you survive the first week, it will get easier." But it didn't get easier. Interrogations went on every night. The investigator, Lieutenant Zimin, was methodical and ruthless. He demanded confessions of espionage, demanded names of accomplices. Maria knew that any name she gave would doom an innocent person to the same fate. "Kozlova, you understand that you could walk out of here tomorrow," Zimin said, slowly circling her chair. "You just need to sign the testimony, admit your connection to Hungarian intelligence. Give us a few names." "I wasn't a spy," Maria repeated for the 100th time. "I only translated documents." "Documents?" The investigator smirked. "And how did you know Hungarian so well? Who taught you? Who was your handler?" Day after day, the same questions. Beatings, sleep deprivation. Maria held on, but she knew her strength wouldn't last long. Around her, stronger women than she were breaking and signing confessions. The verdict was predictable. 10 years in corrective labor camps under Article 58. Anti-Soviet agitation and propaganda. During the reading of the verdict, Maria didn't even listen to the judge. She was thinking that she would never see her home again. The first camp was in Vorkuta. Maria was assigned to logging 12 hours a day with a saw in hand. In any weather. Winters beyond the Arctic Circle, not everyone survived. In the first year, 30% of the prisoners in her barrack died. Katerina arrived at the same camp 3 months later. Seeing a familiar face, Maria cried for the first time in a month. Not from grief, but from relief. She was not alone. "We must survive," Katerina said in rare moments when they could talk alone. "We must tell the world what happens here." But there was no one to tell. Letters were censored. Visits were not allowed. The outside world seemed to cease existing. There was only endless work, constant hunger, and cold that penetrated to the bones. After 2 years in Vorkuta, they were transferred to a women's camp near Magadan. There, they worked in gold mines. Conditions were even worse, not just cold and hunger, but constant danger of cave-ins in the shafts. It was here that Maria overheard a conversation between the camp chief and his deputy about plans to purge political prisoners. They talked about new uranium mines where labor was needed for particularly dangerous work. Everyone understood what that meant. The list of women for shipment was compiled according to certain criteria. Political prisoners with long sentences, those without relatives outside, incorrigible elements. Maria fit all categories. When the transport was announced, she realized, this is the end. But for the first time in 5 years of camps, she had a plan. Insane, practically impossible, but a plan. She would prepare for escape from the first day of the journey. On the last night before departure, Katerina taught her a few survival tricks in the mountains that she remembered from her childhood in the Carpathians. How to find edible plants. How to start a fire without matches. How to navigate by the stars. "If you manage to break free," Katerina whispered, "go west. In the mountains, there are partisans, Ukrainian nationalists. They are enemies of Soviet power, but they won't betray you." In the morning, they were loaded into freight cars. Maria Kozlova's last journey as a prisoner began. She didn't yet know that in a week, she would be falling into a Carpathian abyss, hoping for a miracle. The train rumbled along the rails for the 4th day already, heading west across the vast expanses of the Soviet Union. In freight car number 27, the stuffiness was unbearable despite the February frosts outside. 72 women, pressed against each other, created their own microclimate of despair and sweat. Maria methodically studied every inch of her iron prison. Over the years of imprisonment, she had learned to notice details that could save a life. A crack in a plank, a loosened bolt, a worn part. Anything could become a survival tool. The car was built in 1932, and time had not spared it. The wooden walls had blackened from moisture and age. The iron parts were covered in rust. But it was this dilapidation that gave Maria hope. "You're looking at the walls too much," whispered Zoya Mikhailovna, a former nurse from Minsk. "Better save your strength. There's a long road ahead." Zoya didn't know what Maria and Katerina knew. In a conversation overheard by the guards the day before departure, terrifying words had been spoken: radiation poisoning and an average life expectancy of 6 months. The uranium mines of Kolyma were a death sentence with a deferred execution. Maria felt with her hand the spot on the wall that had caught her attention on the first day. A plank 40 centimeters wide was held by 4 old nails. One was already yielding to her careful efforts. Every night, when most of the women slept, she worked on it using a sharp piece of metal found on the car floor. The plan matured in her head gradually. Escaping from a moving train was suicide, but there was no alternative. The key element was the geography of the route. The train passed through the Carpathians, skirting mountain ridges along a narrow railway. In some places, the track ran over deep gorges. Katerina, who grew up in these parts, was her guide. Despite changes over the years of Soviet rule, the main geographical landmarks remained the same. After Volovet Station, the road goes through Voretsky Pass, Katerina whispered, sharing her childhood memories. There's a bridge over the Latoritsa River. The height is great, but below is water. In winter, it doesn't freeze completely due to the fast current. What height? Maria asked. 20 meters, maybe more, but the rocks are not sheer. There are ledges, trees, if you're lucky. If you're lucky, the whole plan was built on luck, on the plank giving way at the right moment, on the jump not being instant death, on the guards not noticing. Maria studied the guard routine. 2 guards were on duty at the car door, and 2 more patrolled the train outside. Shifts changed every 4 hours. The weakest time was deep night, when fatigue took its toll even on vigilant soldiers. The main problem was timing. She needed to pinpoint exactly when the train would cross the bridge. She had no watch, but she had learned to tell time by sounds and sensations. The rumble of the wheels changed when the train crossed a bridge. The air became colder and damper near the water. Maria, I'll go with you, Katerina said unexpectedly on the 3rd day of the journey.
No, Maria replied firmly.
You have a daughter in Lviv, something to live for. My daughter thinks I died 2 years ago, and the uranium mines are guaranteed death. Maria understood her friend's logic but knew it would be harder for 2. The opening in the wall was calculated for 1 person. A larger gap would attract the attention of other prisoners, among whom there could be informers. On the 4th night, an event occurred that confirmed her worst fears. Anna Semyonovna, an elderly teacher from Zhytomyr, began praying loudly, unable to withstand the psychological pressure. Her prayers quickly turned into hysteria. "Lord, save us," she screamed. "Don't let us die in the mines. I don't want to die from radiation." The guards burst into the car with rifles at the ready. Senior Sergeant Petrov, commanding the guard, was known for his cruelty. "Who told her about the mines?" he barked, scanning the frightened women. No one answered. Anna Semyonovna was beaten with rifle butts and taken to the service car. No one saw her again, but her screams confirmed what Maria and Katerina knew. They were being taken to certain death. After this incident, security was tightened. Now, 1 guard was constantly on duty inside the car. This complicated the plan but didn't make it impossible. Maria noticed that the young Sergeant Volkov, who most often guarded inside the car, had a habit of dozing off toward morning. The 5th night brought new information. The train stopped at a station, and Maria overheard the engine drivers talking. "Still 60 kilometers to Voretsky Pass," one said. "We'll be there by morning." This meant she had 1 night left. Tomorrow at dawn, the train would pass through the mountain section with bridges and gorges. After that, flat terrain would begin where escape would be impossible. Maria spent the last night in feverish preparation. The 4th nail yielded to her efforts. The plank held only at 1 corner. She wrapped her legs with strips of fabric torn from the lining of her jacket. This was supposed to cushion the impact upon falling. The bread given by Katerina she hid in her inner pocket. Her mother's cross she moved to her boot. If she survived, it would be her only link to her past life. When dawn began to tint the sky gray, Maria felt the train starting to climb the mountain. The rumble of the wheels changed. They were on a steeper section. Somewhere ahead, freedom or death awaited her. Sergeant Volkov was dozing, leaning against the car wall. The other women slept, exhausted by the journey and despair. Only Katerina didn't sleep, watching her friend intently. "Remember," she mouthed silently, West to the partisans. Maria nodded and prepared for the jump into the unknown. The train slowed on a sharp mountain curve. Maria felt her heart pounding wildly. This was the moment of truth. Through the crack in the car wall, she saw the mountain river Lateritsa glistening in the pre-dawn light far below. Sergeant Volkov continued to doze. His head swayed in rhythm with the train's movement. The other women slept the uneasy sleep of prisoners, alert, ready to wake at any sound. Only Katerina Petrovna was awake, clenching her fists in tension. Maria carefully pried the loosened plank. It gave way with a quiet creak, fortunately drowned out by the rumble of wheels on the rails. The opening was wide enough to squeeze through, but every movement threatened to give her away. Cold mountain air rushed into the stuffy car. A few women stirred in their sleep but didn't wake. Maria froze, listening to the breathing of the sleepers. Sergeant Volkov mumbled something in his sleep and pulled his helmet over his eyes. Now or never. Maria began squeezing through the opening. The sharp edges of the planks dug into her body, but she clenched her teeth, suppressing a groan of pain. Her jacket caught on a nail, and she had to yank it free, risking waking everyone. Katerina crawled closer, ready to create a diversion if necessary. Her eyes were full of tears. She understood that, most likely, she was seeing her friend for the last time. Finally, Maria squeezed outside and hung on the edge of the car, clinging to a metal handle. The wind burned her face. The train swayed on the curves. Below, at a terrifying height, sharp rocks and the dark water of the river were visible. The composition was crossing a narrow bridge over a gorge. On both sides yawned an abyss at least 25 meters deep. But there was no alternative. In a few minutes, the train would enter a tunnel, and the opportunity would vanish forever. Maria closed her eyes and tried to recall the words of a prayer. Over the years in the camps, memory had erased much, but childhood memories of her grandmother's prayers surfaced from the depths of her consciousness. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. The sound of footsteps on the car roof made her open her eyes. A patrolling guard was walking the train. Another minute and he would spot her. Maria realized she couldn't delay any longer. She released her fingers. The fall lasted an eternity and an instant at once. Icy air whistled in her ears. Her stomach lurched to her throat. Maria saw rocks flashing by, snow-covered firs. The riverbank approaching at horrifying speed. In the last moment, she tried to group herself as Katerina had taught. Legs together, arms to chest, chin tucked. But controlling a fall from such height was impossible. The impact hit a snow-covered slope 10 meters from the water. Maria crashed into snow-covered bushes, which partially cushioned the fall, but the speed was too great. She rolled down the slope, hitting rocks and tree roots. The last thing she remembered before losing consciousness was the sound of the receding train and the silence of the mountain morning, broken only by the roar of water. Consciousness returned slowly, in waves of pain. First, Maria felt the cold penetrating to her very bones. Then came the pain, sharp in her left shoulder, dull throughout her body. Finally, she opened her eyes. Above her loomed a pine branch dusted with snow. The sun was already high, meaning she had lain unconscious for several hours. The train was long gone, and no one knew of her escape. Yet, an attempt to stand caused sharp pain in her left shoulder. Dislocation or fracture, but in her situation it made no difference. Her right leg also hurt, but it bore weight. Her face burned, probably cut by branches. Maria looked around. She lay on the slope of the gorge about 15 meters from the river. The slope was covered in mixed forest. Pines, firs, birches. Snow lay in a thick layer, but less under the trees. First, she needed to check what she had left. Her jacket was torn in several places but held. Boots intact. Her mother's cross was still in her left boot. The piece of bread remained in her inner pocket, though partially crumbled. The sound of a helicopter made her freeze. Somewhere high above the gorge, a military helicopter circled. The search had begun. That meant her escape had been discovered. She had very little time to hide. Maria tried to stand and managed, leaning on her good hand. Her left shoulder pierced with sharp pain, but the bone seemed intact. Likely a dislocation. In the camps, she had seen enough similar injuries. She needed to move away from the river. The helicopter was surveying the valley, and open space was dangerous. Maria began slowly climbing the slope, clinging with her good hand to branches and roots. Each step was laborious. Her body ached from bruises. Her left arm hung like a whip, but the fear of being caught drove her forward. She knew there would be no second chance. Climbing about 50 meters, Maria stopped and listened. The helicopter noise was fading. The pilots were searching another section of the valley. But they would return soon, and she needed to be as far as possible from the fall site. The forest grew denser. Tall firs created a natural canopy, hiding from aerial observation. But walking became harder. The snow under the trees was loose. Her legs sank almost to the knees. By midday, Maria realized this couldn't continue long. She needed to find shelter, treat her wounds, rest a bit. But where in these wild mountains could she hide? The answer came unexpectedly. In the mountain slope, she noticed a dark spot, the entrance to a small cave. Natural or artificial, it didn't matter. The main thing was shelter from the cold and searches. The cave turned out shallow, about 3 meters long, but high enough to stand full height. The floor was covered in a layer of last year's leaves. Apparently, animals wintered here. Maria crawled inside and for the first time in a long while felt relatively safe. It was warmer here, and she couldn't be seen from the air. She could rest and think about further plans. She took out the piece of bread and carefully ate half. The other half she hid. Who knew when she'd find food again? She quenched her thirst by licking snow. The water was icy but clean. Her left shoulder hurt more and more. Maria tried to feel it and realized, definitely a dislocation. In the camp, she had seen prisoners reduce each other's dislocated joints, but doing it herself was practically impossible. The helicopter sound returned. Now it flew lower. The pilots were thoroughly searching the forest. Maria pressed against the cave wall, holding her breath. The noise approached, peaked, and began to fade. For now, they hadn't found her. But the searches were just beginning. Soon, search parties with dogs would enter the forest, and then the cave would become a trap, not a refuge. Maria Fedorovna Kozlova, former translator from Uzhhorod, now a fugitive prisoner, realized that the worst was only beginning. Escaping the train was just the first step. Ahead lay days of struggle for survival in the winter Carpathians, searching for partisans, and hope that freedom did exist after all. The dawn of the third day in freedom greeted Maria with piercing cold and sounds of approaching danger. Through her sleep, she heard the barking of dogs, distant but clear. The search parties had finally entered the forest. The cave that had served as her refuge for 2 days now turned into a trap. Dogs would easily pick up the scent, and running through deep snow with an injured shoulder was practically impossible, but staying meant certain capture. Maria carefully crawled out of the cave and looked around. The snow had stopped, but the sky was covered in heavy gray clouds. A blizzard was approaching in the air. Perhaps the bad weather would become her ally. It would hinder the searches and cover her tracks. The dog's barking came from the east, from the railway side. That meant the search party was climbing the slope, following her trail from the fall site. She had 30 minutes at most. Maria headed west as Katerina had advised. Somewhere in these mountains, there should be partisans, Ukrainian nationalists continuing the war against Soviet power. They were her only hope for salvation. Walking was agonizing. Her left shoulder burned with fire at every movement. Her legs sank into snow that in some places reached her waist. After 2 days without proper food, her strength was noticeably waning, but the fear of being caught drove her forward. She knew what awaited fugitive prisoners. Execution on the spot or, at best, a new sentence and shipment to places even more terrible than the uranium mines. The dog's barking grew closer. Maria realized that simply running was useless. They would catch her anyway. She needed to confuse the trail, using knowledge gained from Katerina and other experienced prisoners. A mountain stream hidden under thin ice became her salvation. Maria carefully stepped onto the ice, testing its strength. The ice held but was slippery. Walking on the ice, she left no tracks that dogs could scent. The stream led down the slope, winding between rocks and trees. Maria walked along it for almost a kilometer until she heard the dogs barking fading. The search party had lost the trail, but it was too early to rejoice. Having lost the trail, the searchers would start combing the area methodically, square by square, and sooner or later they would find her if she didn't get as far away as possible. By noon, snow began to fall. First rare flakes, then thicker and thicker. Maria realized a blizzard was starting, the one she had sensed in the morning. On one hand, it would complicate searches. On the other, it could be deadly for her. In the mountains, a blizzard was not just snowfall. It was an element capable of killing an unprepared person in hours. And Maria was not only unprepared. She was injured, hungry, and dressed in thin camp clothing. She needed to find shelter, but where in this wild forest? No more caves appeared, and building a hut with one hand was impossible. Salvation came in the form of an old, half-ruined log cabin, remnants of a forest hut or hunter's lodge. The roof had partially collapsed, but one corner was still intact. The main thing was it could shelter from wind and snow. Maria crawled into the cabin and inspected her refuge. In the corner lay a pile of old rags, apparently someone's abandoned property. The rags were musty but dry. She could use them as insulation. The biggest luck was a find in another corner. A small supply of firewood left by previous occupants. The wood was dry, but starting a fire without matches was a problem. Katerina had taught her the friction method for making fire, but with one hand, it was practically impossible. Maria tried several times and realized she was wasting precious strength in vain. The blizzard intensified. Wind howled through the cabin's cracks. Temperature dropped. Maria realized that without fire, she wouldn't survive this night. She needed to think of something. The solution came by chance. Digging through the pile of rags, she felt something hard. It was glasses in a metal frame. Must have been lost by some traveler. The lenses were cracked, but one was intact. Maria remembered school physics lessons. A lens can focus sunlight, but the sun hadn't been visible for days. However, there was another light source. The moon. At night, when clouds cleared, moonlight could also be focused. For now, all that remained was to wait and conserve heat. Maria wrapped herself in the found rags, huddled in the most protected corner, and tried to warm herself with movement. But her strength was running out. She took out the remaining half of bread and ate a quarter. She needed to stretch her supplies. She quenched thirst by licking snow frozen on the cabin walls. By evening, the blizzard began to subside. Clouds dispersed, revealing stars. And most importantly, a bright full moon providing enough light for her plan. Maria took the lens and began focusing moonlight on a piece of dry rag. It was harder than with sunlight. Moonlight is weaker, but gradually, after many attempts, the rag began to smolder. Carefully blowing on the smolder, Maria got a small flame. She carefully added dry splinters, then larger sticks. The fire kindled slowly but surely. Finally, a real bonfire blazed in the cabin. Warmth and light seemed the greatest happiness to Maria. After days of cold and fear, she dried her clothes, warmed her frozen hands and feet, but most importantly, the fire gave her hope. If she could start a fire with one hand in such conditions, she had a chance to survive. She just needed to hold on and keep going. On the morning of the fourth day, Maria woke to the sound of voices. Through cracks in the walls, she saw figures in white camouflage suits, military searchers surveying the forest. They were very close but hadn't noticed the smoke from the extinguished fire yet. She needed to leave immediately. Maria quickly gathered the rags that had served as insulation, extinguished the remaining coals with snow, and slipped out of the cabin through a hole in the back wall. The searchers discovered the hut half an hour after her departure. Maria heard their shouts and understood they had found traces of her stay. The hunt resumed with renewed vigor, but now she was stronger. The fire had given her not only warmth but confidence in herself. If she could survive 4 days in the winter mountains, she could go on. She just needed to find those people who would help her remain free forever. Maria Kozlova headed further west, where, according to Katerina, allies in the fight against Soviet power awaited her. The 6th day in freedom brought Maria the first real hope during her entire flight. Walking along a barely noticeable trail through the snow-covered forest, she stumbled upon strange marks, cuts on tree bark, clearly made by human hands. The marks were simple geometric shapes: a cross, a triangle, 2 parallel lines. To a casual traveler, they meant nothing, but Maria remembered Katerina's stories about partisan trails and navigation in the forest. Her left shoulder still hurt, but the pain became more bearable. Apparently, the dislocation was starting to heal on its own, though her arms still hung almost motionless. The main thing was she could walk, and that was most important now. In 6 days of wandering, her food supplies were completely gone. The last bit of bread she ate yesterday evening. Today, she had to make do with bark from young birches and a few rose hips found under the snow. Katerina had taught her that these were edible, but they provided little nutrition. Following the trail with cuts, Maria climbed higher into the mountains. The forest thinned, but the path was well trodden. Clearly, people walked here regularly. This instilled hope but also alarmed her. What if this wasn't a partisan trail but a path of loggers or hunters who might turn her in to the authorities? By noon, the trail led her to a small clearing surrounded by tall firs. In the clearing stood a small wooden chapel, very old, with walls darkened by time and a leaning roof, but it was well maintained, which was strange in such a remote place. Maria cautiously approached the chapel. The door was locked with a simple wooden bolt. Inside, judging by what could be seen through the cracks, there were several icons and a lamp. Someone clearly cared for this place. "Don't move!" A voice came from behind. "Raise your hands so I can see them." Maria froze. The voice spoke in Ukrainian, but with an unfamiliar dialect. She slowly raised her good right hand and tried to lift the left, but pain shot through her shoulder. "I'm injured," she said in Ukrainian. "My left hand won't rise. Turn around slowly." Maria turned and saw a man about 30, dressed in a warm jacket and hat. In his hands was a hunting rifle pointed at her chest. His face was lean with attentive brown eyes. "Who are you?" he asked, not lowering the rifle. "What are you doing in these parts?" "My name is Maria Kozlova," she answered honestly. "I escaped from a prison train 6 days ago. I'm looking." She hesitated, unsure if she could trust this man. "Looking for our people," he finished the sentence. "Those who fight against the communists." Maria nodded. The man stared at her for a long time, studying, then slowly lowered the rifle. "My name is Stepan," he said. "If you're really a fugitive prisoner, you need help. But first, I must make sure you're not a provocateur." "How can I prove it?" Maria asked. "Tell the truth, the whole truth, where you escaped from, what you were in for, how you ended up here." Maria told about her work as a translator, the arrest, the camps, the death train, and the jump into the Carpathian abyss. Stepan listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Uranium mines," he said grimly when she finished. "Yes, we know about that. Many of our people were sent there. No one returned. So, I believe you for now, but the final decision isn't mine. Come on, they're waiting for us." Stepan led her along a barely noticeable trail that climbed even higher into the mountains. Walking became harder, the air thinned, and her strength was waning. Maria stopped several times to catch her breath. "Not far now," Stepan encouraged her. "Hold on a little longer." The trail led them to a rock overhang, under which a cave entrance was hidden. But not a simple natural cave, an expertly equipped hideout. The entrance was camouflaged with branches and rocks so skillfully that it was impossible to notice even from close range. "Password?" a voice asked from inside. "Ukraine has not yet perished," Stepan replied. "And our glory," came the response. The branches moved aside, revealing the passage. Stepan gestured for Maria to enter. Inside was a spacious room lit by kerosene lamps. The cave had been expanded and reinforced with wooden beams. Along the walls were bunks covered with sheepskins. At the far wall, a table where 3 men sat. "Commander," Stepan addressed the one in the middle, "I brought a fugitive prisoner. Says she escaped from a prison train." The commander was a man about 40, with graying mustache and a scar across his left cheek. He wore a military tunic without insignia. His eyes were gray, cold, scrutinizing. "Come closer," he said to Maria. "My name is Roman Mihailovich. I command this detachment of the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, UPA." Maria had heard this name in the camps. Ukrainian nationalists continuing the partisan war against Soviet power. Even after the end of the Great Patriotic War, they were called bandits and terrorists, but for her, they were the only hope for salvation. "Tell your story," Roman Mihailovich said, "and remember, we detect lies quickly. And here, lies mean execution." Maria repeated her story, but this time in more detail. She told about her work in the Hungarian administration, the NKVD arrest, interrogations and verdict, camps in Vorkuta and Magadan, preparation for shipment to uranium mines. The commander and his men listened attentively, sometimes asking questions about details only someone who had been through the camps could know. "And why do you think we'll help you?" Roman Mihailovich asked. "You're not Ukrainian. You don't share our convictions." "Because we have a common enemy," Maria replied. "Soviet power destroyed my life just like yours. I'm not asking you to fight for me. I'm ready to fight with you." "Fight?" One of the partisans smirked. "You can barely stand on your feet, and your arm doesn't work." "The arm will heal," Maria said firmly, "and you can shoot with one hand. The main thing is to know who to shoot at." Roman Mihailovich stared at her for a long time, pondering. Finally, he nodded. "All right, we'll give you shelter, feed you, heal you, but in return, you'll work for us. You're a translator, you know languages. Ukrainian, Russian, Hungarian, a bit of Polish," Maria listed. "Excellent. We have documents that need translating, letters to write. And when you get stronger, there might be other tasks." Maria felt a heavy burden of fear and despair lift from her shoulders. For the first time in 6 days, she was in relative safety. For the first time in years of camps, among people who didn't consider her an enemy. "Stepan, take her to Marta," the commander ordered. "Let her look at the arm and feed her. And tomorrow we'll talk about work." Marta turned out to be a middle-aged woman, a former nurse from Lviv. She examined Maria's shoulder and confirmed the diagnosis. "Dislocation that started healing wrong. Needs reducing," she said. "It'll hurt, but otherwise the arm will remain useless." The procedure was excruciating, but Maria gritted her teeth and endured. When the bone snapped back into place, the pain first intensified, then gradually subsided. They fed her hot soup with meat, the first normal food in many days, gave her warm clothes to replace the torn camp jacket, and laid her on a bunk. Falling asleep in warmth and relative safety, Maria thought for the first time in a long while not about survival, but about the future. She was free. She had found allies and now could not only save her own life but fight against those who had destroyed the lives of millions. The war for her personal freedom was won, but the bigger war was just beginning. 3 weeks in the partisan hideout restored not only Maria's physical strength but her faith in the future. Her arm had almost fully healed thanks to Marta's skilled treatment. Regular food and warmth restored her emaciated body. But most importantly, she felt human again, not a prisoner. Roman Mihailovich hadn't lied about work. Every day, Maria translated documents intercepted by the partisans from Soviet authorities. NKVD orders, military reports, lists of suspicious persons. All this helped the UPA detachment plan operations and avoid roundups. "This is especially important," the commander said, handing her a fresh document. "Plan for an operation to clear our bases in this area. Need to know exact dates and enemy forces." Maria carefully studied the papers. The plan was detailed and ruthless. It involved destroying not only partisans but all local residents suspected of collaborating with UPA. Entire villages were to be wiped off the face of the earth. "The operation starts in 5 days," she reported. 2 NKVD regiments and 1 border guard battalion involved. Total strength about 1,200 men. "Then we need to leave," Roman Mihailovich said grimly. But not everyone in the detachment agreed with retreat. Young partisans, especially those who had lost families in Soviet repressions, burned with desire to fight. "How long can we run through the forests?" heatedly argued Vasil, a 20-year-old lad from a burned village. "When will we start a real war?" "A real war is when you know how to win," the commander replied. "Not when you just want revenge." The debates continued all day. Maria observed the discussion and understood the detachment faced a tough choice. Retreating meant preserving people but losing an important base and influence in the region. Staying meant almost certain death but a chance to inflict significant damage on the enemy. The decision came unexpectedly. Stepan, who had been on reconnaissance, returned with news that changed everything. "There's a prisoner camp in the valley," he reported to the commander. "About 200 people, maybe more, being taken to build a railway. Small guard. A platoon of escorts." Roman Mihailovich pondered. Liberating prisoners was one of UPA's priority tasks, but it could disrupt retreat plans. "What kind of people?" he asked. "Various, but I saw several Ukrainians from our area. And, interestingly, many women." Maria's heart skipped a beat. What if Katerina was among the prisoners? Her only friend could be there, just a few kilometers away. "Commander," she addressed Roman Mihailovich, "I must see those people. Among them might be the woman who helped me survive in the camps. Too dangerous. If you're caught, they won't catch me. I know how to move unnoticed. 5 years in camps taught me something." After long arguments, the commander agreed. Stepan took her to a spot from where she could observe the camp without risking detection. The camp was located in a wide valley surrounded by forest. Several rows of barbed wire, guard towers, barracks for prisoners. A typical temporary camp for construction work. Maria lay in bushes on a hillside, watching through binoculars the people below. Prisoners worked clearing the route for the future railway. Women and men dug earth, carried stones, chopped wood under guard supervision. And suddenly she saw a familiar figure. Katerina Petrovna stood by a pile of stones, leaning on a shovel. She had thinned greatly, aged, but it was definitely her. "Found her?" Stepan asked quietly. "Yes," Maria whispered. "It's her." Now retreat was impossible. Maria couldn't abandon the only person who had helped her survive, even if it meant putting the whole detachment at risk. Back at the hideout, she told the commander about her find. "I understand your feelings," Roman Mihailovich said, "but liberating the camp requires great forces, and we don't have them." "What if not the whole camp?" Maria suggested. "If we liberate only part of the prisoners, those who can join us?" The plan matured in her head gradually. Not a frontal attack on a fortified camp, but a targeted operation. Infiltrate the camp disguised as new prisoners, free the most valuable people, disappear before the guards realize what's happening. "Too risky," the commander shook his head. "But feasible," Maria insisted. "I have experience living in camps. I know the routine, the weak points in the guard system." The arguments continued into the deep night. In the end, Roman Mihailovich agreed to a compromise. A reconnaissance operation with the possibility of liberating a small group of prisoners if a good opportunity arose. The operation began at dawn. Maria, dressed in camp clothes, accompanied by 2 partisans disguised as guards, headed to the camp. Forged documents by the detachment's experts were supposed to explain the arrival of new prisoners. Her heart pounded so loudly it seemed the whole world could hear. This was the riskiest moment. If the forgery was detected, it would end in execution. But the documents passed inspection. The camp chief, sleepy and indifferent, didn't even glance at Maria. She was registered and sent to the women's barack. The meeting with Katerina happened during lunch break. Her friend didn't recognize her at first. Maria had changed greatly in a month of ordeals. But when she did, she barely held back a cry of joy. "Maris, alive," she whispered, hugging her. "I thought you smashed yourself in the fall." "Almost did," Maria replied, "but survived and came for you." "For me? How?" Maria quickly explained the plan. Tonight, during guard shift, she and several other prisoners should sneak to the fence. Partisans would cut a passage in the wire, and the group could escape to the forest. "This is madness," Katerina whispered. "If caught, they'll shoot everyone. And if we don't try, we'll die a slow death here. I saw the documents. This camp is temporary too. In a month, everyone will be sent further north." Katerina nodded, understanding. Further north meant only one thing: uranium mines or other places from which no one returned. The operation started at 2 a.m. Maria knew that at this time, the guard was least vigilant. Midnight shift, when drowsiness overpowers discipline. A group of 7 female prisoners quietly slipped out of the barack. Maria led them to the agreed spot at the fence where partisans should wait. Everything went according to plan until the last moment. The passage in the wire was ready. The women began crawling toward the forest, but then dogs barked. A patrol dog scented a foreign smell. "Run!" Maria shouted, pushing Katerina toward the forest. "I'll delay them." She ran in the opposite direction, drawing the guards' attention to herself. Spotlights swept the campgrounds. Guards shouted. Shots rang out. Maria ran toward the main gates, knowing death awaited there, but giving her friends a chance to escape. Bullets whistled overhead, but she kept running. Salvation came in the form of an explosion. Partisans blew up the ammunition depot in the camp, creating chaos and distracting the guards. In the confusion, Maria managed to reach the forest and join the detachment. The operation succeeded partially. 12 people were led out of the camp, including Katerina. Losses were 1 killed partisan and 3 wounded. For such an operation, it was a success, but the price was higher than expected. 2 days later, Soviet troops began a large-scale operation to clear the entire area. The UPA detachment was forced to split into small groups and scatter through the mountains. "This is because of me," Maria said to the commander before parting. Because of the camp liberation, they intensified the pursuit. "No," Roman Mihailovich replied. "It was inevitable. Sooner or later they would have come, and we saved people who might have perished. It was worth it." The detachment split into 3 groups. Maria and Katerina ended up in Stepan's group, which was to make its way west to the Hungarian border. There, rumors said, guides could be found willing to smuggle fugitives to safety for a fee. Parting with the commander was hard. In a month of shared life, these people had become family to her, the first real family in many years. "If you make it to the west, tell the world what's happening here," Roman Mihailovich said in farewell. "About the camps, the repressions, our struggle. Let them know the truth." Maria promised. She understood that her personal war for freedom had grown into something bigger. Now she was a witness who must tell the world about the crimes of the Soviet system. Stepan's group began moving toward the border on a rainy April night. Ahead lay new dangers, new trials. But now Maria knew she wasn't alone. Beside her were people ready to fight for freedom to the end. The price of this freedom turned out higher than she thought, but there was no alternative. Better to die free than live as a slave to a system that turned people into numbers and destroyed all that was human. The Hungarian border turned out not a line on a map, but a whole world of danger, hopes, and unexpected discoveries. Stepan's group reached it in 3 weeks, hiding from patrols, enduring rains and cold nights, losing people and finding new allies. Maria walked along a mountain trail leading to the border zone and thought about the path traveled. 2 months ago, she was a prisoner in a freight car, doomed to death in uranium mines. Today, she was a free woman walking toward a new life. But at what cost had this freedom come? Roman Mihailovich died in a shootout with border guards a week ago, covering the group's retreat. Vasil, the young partisan who so wanted a real war, blew up on a mine 2 days ago. Of the original group of 20, only 8 remained. "The border is close," Stepan said, studying the terrain through binoculars. "See that forest? Beyond it is Hungary." Between them and the forest stretched a wide strip of open terrain, densely studded with barbed wire and minefields. The border zone was well fortified. Soviet authorities weren't going to let their citizens go easily. "There's a passage," Stepan continued. "Smugglers laid a trail through the minefield, but you have to pay for it." There was nothing to pay with. The group had no gold, no jewels, no currency, only weapons and the desire to live. They met the contact with smugglers in an abandoned border village. He was an elderly Hungarian named Istvin, who spoke broken Russian and clearly saw the refugees only as a source of income. 500 rubles per person, he said, appraisingly looking at the group. "Expensive but safe. No other way." "We have no money," Stepan said honestly, "but we have weapons. Submachine guns, rifles, ammunition." Istvin got interested. Weapons on the black market were expensive, especially Soviet ones valued for reliability. "Show me," he said. The deal was struck. 2 PPSH submachine guns and 500 rounds for smuggling the whole group. Expensive, but no choice. The border crossing began deep at night. Istvin led the group along a barely noticeable trail between mines, knowing every safe step precisely. He was a professional, a man who had helped people cross one of the most guarded borders in the world for many years. Maria walked last, helping Katerina, who still hadn't recovered from camp illnesses. Each step could be the last. One wrong move and a mine would tear them to pieces. But the guide's professionalism paid off. After 4 hours of torturous travel, the group was on Hungarian territory. For the first time in many years, Maria breathed the air of a free country. "Welcome to Hungary," Istvan said with a crooked smile. "Now you're under the protection of Western allies." The protection turned out conditional. Hungary in 1947 was a country ravaged by war, where chaos and confusion reigned. Soviet troops still stood in the country, and refugees' safety was relative. But it was freedom. Even if not complete, even if temporary, but freedom. You could speak what you thought. You didn't have to fear arrest for a careless word. You could plan the future. The group spent the first days in Hungary in a camp for displaced persons near Budapest. It was a huge Baroque town where thousands lived. Refugees from the USSR, former POWs, surviving concentration camp inmates. Here, Maria first heard the truth about what had happened in the world while she was in camps. About the Nuremberg trials of Nazi criminals, about the beginning Cold War between the USSR and Western allies, about how the world was gradually learning the truth about Soviet repressions. There are organizations collecting testimonies about communist crimes. An American intelligence officer, Major Smith, told her, "Your testimony could be very valuable." Maria agreed to give testimony. She told about the camps, forced labor, deportations of entire peoples, the death train carrying women to uranium mines, the UPA partisans continuing to fight for Ukraine's freedom. Her testimony, along with thousands of others, formed the basis of documents later submitted to the UN and other international organizations. The world gradually learned the truth about what happened behind the Iron Curtain, but personal life required decisions. Staying in the refugee camp was only temporary. She needed to choose where to go, how to build a new life.
Katerina chose Canada.
There was a large Ukrainian diaspora ready to help compatriots. She dreamed of finding her daughter, who might also have made it to the West. "Come with me," she urged Maria. "There, in Canada, we can start a new life. Forget the past." But Maria didn't want to forget. The past was part of her, and she wasn't going to renounce it. Moreover, she felt responsibility toward those who remained in Soviet camps, toward those who died in the struggle for freedom. "I'll go to America," she told Katerina. "There are more opportunities to tell the world the truth. More people who need to hear it." Parting with her friend was hard. Katerina was the last link to her past life, to the years of trials they had endured together. But each had her own path. The U.S. visa was obtained in 3 months. Maria boarded a ship in Hamburg bound for New York. For the first time in her life, she sailed the sea, saw endless watery expanses, felt part of the big world. On the ship's deck, she met other emigrants, Poles, Czechs, Germans. Each had their own story of escaping communist tyranny, and each carried not only hopes for a better life but memories of those left behind. The Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor seemed to Maria the most beautiful sight in her life. This symbol of freedom and democracy meant the end of her long journey from a Soviet camp to a new life. America met her not as a heroine but as one of thousands of refugees seeking asylum here. The first months were tough. Ignorance of the language, lack of means, the need to start from scratch at age 38. But Maria didn't give up. She got a job as a translator in an immigrant organization helping Soviet refugees. She learned English, obtained American citizenship, began writing memoirs about her experience. The book, Jump to Freedom, was published in 1952 and became one of the first detailed testimonies about the Soviet camp system in English. It told not only of the author's personal experience but of the fates of thousands who passed through the Gulag. Years passed. Maria built a family, raised children, became a respected member of American society. But she never forgot her past and those who helped her survive. In the year the Berlin Wall fell and the collapse of the communist system began, Maria was among those who greeted the event with tears of joy in their eyes. Finally, the world saw the truth about communist crimes. In 1992, she returned to independent Ukraine to find the grave of Roman Mihailovich and other partisans who died in the fight for freedom. A monument to UPA heroes was erected in those same Carpathians where once a young woman jumped from a death train and began her path to freedom. At the monument's opening, Maria gave a speech that became her testament to future generations. Freedom is not a gift given once and forever. It is a value you must fight for every day. Remember those who gave their lives for your freedom. Remember those who went through the hell of camps and prisons. And never allow tyranny to return under any slogans. Maria Fedorovna Kozlova died in 2000 at age 91 in her home in New York. surrounded by children and grandchildren. Her last words were, "I was free, and you remain free." Her story became a symbol of the human spirit's struggle against tyranny. The story of a woman who jumped from a death train and survived to tell the world the truth about those times when freedom was not a right but a privilege that had to be won at the cost of life. In UN archives, her testimonies about Soviet camps are still kept. In libraries around the world stand copies of her book. And in the Carpathian Mountains, a monument reminds that even in the darkest times of history, there are people ready to risk everything for freedom. Maria Kozlova's jump from the death train lasted a few seconds, but the path to freedom it began lasted her whole life and didn't end with her death. It continues in the memory of those who read her story and in the hearts of those who believe that freedom is humanity's greatest value.